If the president or prime minister of your country said, we're going to start importing 55% of the natural gas we need, 52% of the coal we need, and 34% of the mineral oil we need for our country from Russia, how would you respond? If that's not something that people should be voting on, what is? The Russia-Ukraine war has highlighted some major issues that should lead you to question your country's energy independence and foreign trade policies. If you're new to my content, One Direct Democracy is a movement for upgrading the global democratic system by taking the power away from politicians and putting it in the hands of the people by using direct democracy. It'll also eliminate left and right politics. I've created the technology and a plan for how to make it work. If you want more information, check the links in the description. For each episode, I'll pick an important issue, give you an outline of the problem, suggest solutions, and you can decide how you would vote. In this case, we're talking about your country's dependence on oil and your country's energy independence. Okay, if you're just looking for another talking head that isn't interested in actually doing anything, you're in the wrong place. If you want to be part of the solution, let's get into it. So to be clear, this video is not about sanctions and whether they work. I'll get into that in another video. This video is about the decisions that your country makes that put your country in an awkward position. So this is a summary of what's happening right now at the time of this video. According to this article from the BBC, the US is banning all Russian oil and gas imports, and the UK will phase out Russian oil by the end of 2022. US President Joe Biden says it targets the main artery of Russia's economy. The EU, which gets a quarter of its oil and 40% of its gas from Russia, says it will switch to alternative supplies and make Europe independent from Russian energy well before 2030. Germany has put on hold permission for the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia to open. Okay, so let's start by looking at this from the point of view of a politician. Every politician's primary objective is to get elected or re-elected, so by definition, they have short-term thinking. So right now, a lot of people don't like the fact that Russian oil is funding Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is obviously not the sort of thing that the average politician thinks about, because the only thing they want to do is get elected, and therefore they just want the cheapest supply of oil, assuming that your country is dependent on oil. Now, if you don't get your oil from Russia, you probably get it from Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Venezuela. They're all variations of the same thing. They're all using the proceeds from the export of oil to oppress their own people or invade other people. You might think this is a problem, but the average politician doesn't. This is how people that are exclusively focused on capitalism, money, and getting votes think. What is the cheapest fuel, and where's the cheapest place to buy it? If the cheapest fuel is fossil fuels, and it damages the environment, and it comes from dictators that oppress their people, so what? I'm a capitalist, just give me the fuel. By the way, I am a capitalist, but I also happen to think that unrestricted capitalism is stupid, and this is a perfect example. Now, the problem is that once you get yourself into this situation, it can be extremely difficult to get yourself out of it. So let's look at the perfect example of all of this right now, and that's Germany. This is from an article in The Guardian. Germany has warned that an immediate boycott of Russian gas and oil supplies could hurt its own population more than Vladimir Putin, bringing mass unemployment and poverty. If we flip a switch immediately, there will be supply shortages, even supply stops in Germany. So what the energy minister in Germany is saying is that this will not just be inconvenient, this could be catastrophic for the German economy. The article goes on to say, few other Western economies are as dependent on Russian energy as Germany. 55% of the natural gas, 52% of coal, and 34% of the mineral oil used in the country comes from Russia, for which it pays hundreds of millions of euros daily, financially supporting a war machine currently devastating Ukraine. So if you're German, how do you feel about the fact that you're currently funding Russia's invasion of Ukraine? I'm guessing you're not too happy about it. Okay, so what is the German Chancellor doing about it? Since the start of the war in Ukraine, the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has U-turned on a number of foreign policy red lines, consenting to deliver lethal weapons to Ukraine, supporting cutting Russia off from the SWIFT payment system, and freezing the completed but not yet functional Nord Stream 2 pipeline underneath the Baltic Sea. Okay, so what this tells us is that the German Chancellor is obviously not happy with what Russia's doing. He's doing everything that he can do, but there's one thing that he obviously cannot do. The article goes on to say, but the centre-left leader has said that his hands are tied when it comes to banning Russian energy. Currently, there is no other way to secure Europe's supply with energy to generate heat, for mobility, for power supply, and for industry. Okay, now let's look at this from the point of view of a regular citizen. As citizens, We have a longer-term view for our country than the average politician, because the average politician is focusing on the next election. Now, in the investment world, we have concepts like portfolio management and diversification, and they obviously apply in this situation. The reason that you diversify your portfolio of investments is that you want to make sure that you don't fall off a cliff if something goes wrong with one investment. What's happened here is the foreign trade equivalent of one investment going bad, and it kills your entire portfolio. Then there's the issue of how we want to help Ukrainians. Some people have decided to join the Ukraine Foreign Legion and actually fight. Most of us won't sign up to do something like that, but we should be prepared to pay a little extra for some commodities as a result of sanctions that make life more difficult for Vladimir Putin. People in Ukraine are dying. I don't mind paying a few extra dollars for fuel. Now, I understand that increases in fuel costs will obviously disproportionately hurt people in the lower income brackets, but I'm sure you understand the point that I'm trying to make. There's another example of this playing out in Australia, which is where I'm from. According to this article from the Financial Review, China will boost domestic iron ore production by 30%, significantly ramp up investments in overseas mines, and strengthen scrap steel recycling under a plan designed to break Beijing's dependency on Australia's most valuable commodity export, which is iron ore. So what's happening here is that China has already recognized that it has an unhealthy dependency on iron ore exported from Australia. If you've been following the international news, you might have noticed that there's been a lot of tension between Australia and China. So China's doing the right thing from their point of view to try to minimize the exposure that they have to a country that has a different view than they do on a list of different issues. The article goes on to say, China's top steel industry executives and senior government officials outlined a strategy for achieving the 5-year targets in an article published this week. The control of overseas iron ore resources is obviously insufficient. Control is the obvious word here. Regardless of which country you're in, you need to have as much control as you can get. And more than 80% of the import volume comes from Australia and Brazil. You don't have to be a genius to understand that if 80% of your iron ore is coming from 2 countries, you're going to have a serious problem if you have a problem with those 2 countries. The risks to resource security are prominent. This diversification argument also needs to happen in reverse, because 35% of Australia's exports go to China. If your government wants to massively increase the economic risk to your country by entering into arrangements with brutal dictators, or buying commodities that fund oppression, or put your country in a position where it could fall off a cliff if it loses one big trading partner, isn't it obvious that these are things that you should be voting on? Let me know what you think in the comments. The reality is that we've reached a point in time in our evolution where representative democracy no longer serves the will of the people, and the problems that made direct democracy impractical have been solved. That's why I created One Direct Democracy. It's a movement for upgrading the global democratic system by taking power away from the politicians and putting it in the hands of the people by using direct democracy. I've created the technology and a plan for how to make it work. We don't have to convince any politicians or powerful people to do anything to make this happen. We have the power to do it on our own, we just have to decide to do it. If you're new to all of this, check out the other videos on my channel and the links in the description. Direct democracy is the purest form of democracy. Representative democracy is an outdated, blunt instrument.